All right, it's the System Failure Podcast, number 80. How are you on this fine March spring morning here, Nate?
Hello, Brian. Well, first of all, I'm excited about number 80. Every time the tens digit flips over, it's a cause for celebration. So I always like to celebrate our numbers as they tick upward. And also, I went for my first trot of the spring yesterday. I played hockey all winter. And then I thought about trying to get out there and do some running while I played hockey. Because I was just feeling a little stir crazy in the house as, January turned to February. But we got a spate of insanely cold weather up here in Maine. I think the whole country did as well. And it was like 0 degrees for like a couple of weeks on end. So that killed my motivation for a little bit. But with hockey coming to an end last week and me having no outlet for my physical energy, I got out there, did some road running this week. And I have to say it felt great. The sun was shining. Soon enough, there'll be buds on the trees. I'm officially in cabin fever mode, and I think I was saying the same thing last week at this point in the podcast too. It's really a bleak time of year if you haven't had a chance to travel to warmer climes to get some relief from the relentless Maine winter.
Well, I was doing some hot yoga this morning, and it's kind of peak yoga season because you can step outside afterwards and kind of enjoy the sunlight.
I see. Peak hot yoga season, eh?
Yeah, because when it gets to be the summer, it's like hotter outside than it is inside. And then in the winter, it's just like minus 10 degrees, and that's less good for standing outside and enjoying the sunshine. But, I was doing the hot yoga this morning, and I was doing some maneuver, and, and then my back popped mightily, and now I'm paralyzed.
Well, I hope not. I hope that you felt increased mobility. Why does that happen? It's driving me nuts. Like, why would cracking your back feel so great? I mean, it's like if you go on Wikipedia or you ask the internet, why do any of your joints crack? It will tell you that there's fluid, that your joints are suspended in these, essentially bags of fluid, and that little bubbles form in that fluid inside these sacs, and that when you forcibly change the geometry or the volumetrics of that sac, sometimes you force that air to like dissolve and undissolve from the solution it's in, so you get a sac that's changing how pressurized it is. I don't know. I obviously, but you can tell by my explanation that I don't fully understand what the explanation is that you read on the internet. But,
well, it's one of these things that no one really understands, it seems like, or I don't know. Well, this was the sort of thing where I let go, and then it doesn't really everything's like sitting differently now, and I don't know if it's because I've been doing lots of yoga and kung fu, and maybe things are going to be sitting in a better way, or if I've permanently injured myself. But I've been trying to practice my posture and thinking about keeping my ears level. I mean, it's really easy when you're looking at your phone or working at the computer. You start doing some weird thing where your shoulder sticks up. I don't know if this is a relatable topic for our listeners, but we've spent countless hours, especially in the height of our weed smoking days, lamenting our wretched backs. And but I don't know. I wonder if the bodily pain is in some ways psychosomatic. I have my own struggles with anxiety or whatever, or feeling good in general, and it seems like there's some stuckness there. But on a macro level, our society is also stuck in some way, right? And so how much pent up emotion, and I don't know, maybe not aggression, but how much pent up, you see you see homeless people, and they have these the way they move looks terrible. And if you do a lot of crazy drugs, that will do it to you. And how much of this is some societal systemic weight that weighs on all our minds, that's left over from our days as the peasantry and being ruled by the upper class or whatever.
Well, yeah, I think that's really I like how you tied into a sort of broad system failure theme at the end. What you mentioned there, your physical body, what's wrong with my physical body, and then what's wrong with my mind and my psyche, and then on a macro level, what's wrong with society in general. It is true that just generally speaking, the more difficult or stubborn problems kind of pile up, right? If you could deal with them easily, you would have, right? There's a selection process whereby the most persistent problems are the ones that are most difficult to do something about, right? So if your back is stuck, it's stuck in just the way that you can't quite unstick it with your complement of musculoskeletal geometry, you know?
It's like when you're on a plane and you like can't you can move your legs in a lot of ways, but there's also the way you can't move your legs because you're crammed into that plane. Yeah. And by the end of like a 6-hour flight, you're gonna lose your GD mind.
All you can think about is how glorious it would be to extend your entire chicken wing out there, your entire leg. Just make it, just get it so your knee locks, and you just think about how glorious it would feel to just get your knee all the way out and locked, and all you can think about that. Yeah, I definitely have had that experience, but you're unfortunately crammed into the window seat, and there'll be no leg extension for many hours to come. Yeah, that's a tough place to be. So I got to think that everyone else has problems. Now, we are the children of chiropractors, right? That's what makes it, especially pathetic that we got no idea what this neck cracking business really is. But, I think everyone's physical problems and mental problems and socioeconomic, collective problems are all the ones left over are the ones that are really nagging and really stubborn. You just can't quite figure out can't quite get a way to solve. So I don't think that they're all the same problem, but they're all the same type of problem, and that they're an accumulation of, as you get older, you get this accumulation of problems you're not quite sure how to solve, and they start stacking up. So that's definitely how I feel about my back situation. We were just talking before the mics heated up here about, I think that because I didn't want to be fat as a kid, our society is very fat shaming, and our family was doubly, so we were a very health conscious family. And so I would suck in my gut unconsciously, I think. And of course, when you're clenching, because you've been at your desk writing or typing keyboard and working a mouse or whatever you're doing, right? If you're clenched in some unconscious way and not realizing it, you're going to affect it's going to be asymmetrical. There's no way you're going to be able to clench quite symmetrically. And so I think I just had a slightly twisted affect, just the way that I learned to use my muscles. And then I started weightlifting in earnest when I got into my 20s and baked that slight twist into my core. So now I'm constantly stretching that, and it feels glorious to stretch it, but I have to be conscious not to clench my spine in the way that I'm habitually accustomed to clenching. So yeah, I have one of these stubborn problems. I just can't quite figure out how to automate that, make it go away.
Well, in Kung Fu, we talk about the importance of relaxing, and I don't know, just the wear and tear of being at a computer or whatever, or looking at your phone, or just living modern life. It makes you kind of want to do something to counteract it. But I see the counteraction isn't right either. So
it's also asymmetrical.
I don't know. It's you definitely have to try to relax. But I don't know. I'm hoping that we're gonna have some kind of breakthrough, wherein the glories of Marxism will be realized, and then our bodies and minds will both be freed, and then we'll really be in a new era. So
that's from your lips to God's ears, Brian. That's the ultimate prayer right there. All of our problems should be removed in one fell swoop. I hope so too. And may I say, we were also in our pre-podcast briefing, we were chit-chatting about physical therapy. It sounds like you may be headed to a physical therapist who I once had, and this man told me that you have a set of bones, right? And then you have a set of soft tissue in which those bones are suspended. And the soft tissue can kind of adapt, where the bones are what they are. They can, your femur is what it is. It can't really be anything but a femur. But the soft tissue, he said, his words are, there is no wrong posture. Your posture is going to be soft tissue adapting to whatever's going on in your environment. And so I do think that there's maybe there's some element to the hot yoga stretch that cracks your back, where what's really happening is they say your muscles are encased in this layer of fascia between your skin and your muscles. There's this fascia, which is this tough tissue that holds your whole meat suit together, right? Otherwise, it would just all fall on the ground like a wheelbarrow full of hamburger meat, right? You got this fascia that holds you into place, and so maybe there's some amount of cracking and popping softer tissue, and maybe you are severing softer tissue, but it can grow back or something. Or maybe I'm just hopeful that my many back crackings and stretchings aren't permanently altering my soft tissue to where I can never get it back. But I will say, by way of this, I remember one time I was lifting weights in the gym of this very apartment complex, Brian, and I just remember having weights in my hands and moving them in a way that my arms were outstretched to my sides, and feeling my shoulder pop back into place, and a whole bunch of soft tissue just ripping. It was such a ripping sound that I put down my weights. I was really concerned that I'd done it this time. But I have to say, my back has been 80% better since that incident. So that's kind of how it looks from where I'm sitting. But this is all futile speculation from a place of dark and benighted ignorance. So I should emphasize that before anyone goes out and tries, working their arm muscles like that with weights or anything like that. Don't do this. Don't try this at home.
All right. Well, we're on a mission for a glorious catharsis here on the System Failure Podcast, and I'm determined to get it. Yeah, as you mentioned, we're on to episode 80. It's like a new decade of System Failure Podcast.
Yes.
And so, we're gonna, by hook or by crook, we're gonna land this boat or whatever. So,
all right. Outstanding. Okay. Well, I suppose with that, Brian, should I launch into this week's Wall Street Journal article of the week?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the System Failure article of the week.
There you go. I guess I should just preface all this like the framework on which I'm going to hang these ornaments here is just this idea that there was this back in the late 19th century. You mentioned a second ago there was this Marxist prophecy that there's a fundamental problem with the capitalist organization of production, the thing where people make things either as employees or as employers. Like that's the production relationship. And Marx just noticed, there's a problem with that. The more technology, that system is great at promoting technological innovation, but ultimately that technology will replace the employees and you will have a problem. And what's the problem? Well, if the employees are all out of a job, the employers will have fired all their employees thinking that they've done a great thing for their bottom line, but really they're all eradicating the markets for each other's products en masse. All right, so the great prophecy is ultimately we're going to have some new way of organizing production once technology becomes prevalent enough. This is just Marx noticing the trends of his day, writing stuff down, and he was right about some things and wrong about others, but his analysis had a major impact on world history. I think we can at least admit it's at least worth engaging with in some serious and sober way, right? So this is like...
Well, obviously we're trending in that direction. Yeah. I guess I've expressed skepticism before that, like, the dynamic is going to change completely, but there's definitely, like, in the stock market, chart, it's heading in that direction, and we've seen that change. Like AI is going to do it to us, but obviously, like the America's industrial situation is completely like left America.
Yes,
although maybe that's changing, and that's like Marx's observation in action, right?
Yeah, well, I'm going to make the argument that Marx's prophecy really came true in the 70s. And then when it did, wages stagnated for the American middle class and leading to ultimately to the great financial crisis of 2008 and the resulting political crisis of the candidacy of Mr. Trump, who much has been made lately. So this Wall Street Journal article is about consumer debt. And so I would just point out that the way that we kept the capitalist system moving, kept it afloat when huge amounts of when you offshore all of your factories to China and fire your domestic workforce and hire foreign workforce for pennies on the dollar instead, what's really happening is the people that own those businesses, the employers, are able to keep that delta between the profits that they no longer have to pay their super expensive domestic workforce and the profits they have to pay out for the tiny minuscule chunk of their profits they have to pay out for the very cheap foreign workforce. What happened was that went into corporate profits, right? Businesses became more profitable because their labor costs went way down, right? And the problem is that the American middle class no longer has enough money to buy all of the things that are being shipped in from China that we used to make here. And the way that the patch we put on that tire is consumer debt, right? The 1980s is the rise of the shopping mall and the credit card, famously. Prior to the 1980s, it was principally businesses that used credit cards for expense accounts. But now credit cards are a household staple, as we're about to find out from the Wall Street Journal. So my contention here, and the reason that I enjoyed this article in particular, and picked it out for the listening pleasure of our esteemed system failure audience, is because, debt is the sign, exploding consumer debt is the sign that we're hurtling towards, this Marxist inflection point prophesied over a century ago. Like, obviously, the problem of the middle class not having enough money to be able to buy the products that runs our economy. Right? Obviously, the problem is that borrowing the money for the middle class to buy those products is a temporary solution. You just can't keep kicking that can down the road. Right? So, all right.
It's just hilarious that the Band-Aid on the woes of the middle class is credit cards. It's an obvious non-solution and one that will only exacerbate the issue and cause that elastic band to snap back at some point, huh?
Yeah, right. So, right. Like Reaganism, the rise of neoliberalism is like slashing tax cuts for the wealthy to try to stimulate growth that way. But the problem is people don't have enough money to afford the products, and debt, like you're saying, is only it preserves the balance sheets for the wealthy for a little short time, but it just creates an even bigger reckoning or judgment day waiting for us down the road. Yeah.
I just can't imagine what this election must have been like when Ronald Reagan was running against Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is trying to put solar panels on the White House and stuff, and I don't know, but people, they got duped, and we got Ronald Reagan, and apparently he's some kind of American hero to people on the right, I guess. And it just leads right into like George W. Bush was his VP, and that leads into Bill Clinton, and that leads into Bush Jr. And we've talked about, last time we went back in about how George Prescott Bush was a Nazi.
Been on the business plot. Yep.
Yeah. And so, man, what a fateful election. And man, the people who voted for Ronald Reagan, we should be mad at. Although there is this idea that Ronald Reagan was kind of a patsy. And there's like a theory that we talked about before that he was gunned down because he was threatening the Federal Reserve. But it doesn't appear to be actually true. Although the person who shot
Hinckley
is like an associate of the Bush family, though, which is like the craziest thing ever. So like I really, it's impossible to figure out where the truth lies there. And no one's just going to tell you that the Bush family tried to send a message to Ronald Reagan by shooting him that he better fall in line and not do anything too progressive. So.
Certainly not.
Anyway, that's a wild bit of American history, huh?
Reagan was really charming. He had that 9 the scariest words that you can possibly hear. I'm from the government and I'm here to help. It's like, yikes. It's just look. Well, the folks that voted for Reagan, they were told there's no reason to crack a book about Karl Marx. There's no reason to. There's no paradigm other than cut tax cuts for the wealthy and deregulate business. It's our only way forward. There is no alternative. Was Margaret Thatcher's line, like Tina was her quote from, or her slogan from the UK, right? There is no alternative. There's nothing we can do but to deal with our flagging growth. There's nothing we can do but cut taxes on the wealthy and cut regulation.
One thing about that election, and I learned this in history in college, and it was so crazy. I've looked it up a couple times, but the thing is that the Reagan administration had some kind of connection to the whole the Iranian hostage scandal or whatever. Like that scandal was drawn out to help Ronald Reagan get elected. There was some kind of connection there, and that's just like an unbelievable fact. That's some realpolitik right there.
Yeah, it was one of Reagan's guys who was like he had some influence over the negotiation. You're right. They delayed the resolution to the Iran hostage crisis, in such that Reagan could take power. Right, or Reagan could,
it was a huge scandal for Jimmy Carter. It made him look weak and like some kind of soft lib, and so and now here we are. Just to tie up the loose end to I'm from the government and we're here to help. I like to think of that line and then smash cut to what was the name of the Treasury Secretary under Bush who was on his knees begging Congress to put through the act to bail out the banks. What was that guy's name? I forgot. Hank Paulson. That's who it was. Yeah. I mean, it's like, we just hate government intervention right up until the banks crash the economy, and we have to do only government intervention can save the day at that point. It really shows the fatuousness of that sort of thinking, but it certainly won the day in the 1980s. And an explosion in consumer debt that we're seeing now is an ominous sign, as detailed by our good friends over at the Wall Street Journal here. All right. Well, give it to us.
So this article is entitled, Consumers Keep Bailing Out the Economy. Now They Might Be Maxed Out. And it's subheadlined, Recession Fears Rekindle Concerns That Americans Are Overstretched on Debt. This article had 3 authors, Rachel Louise Ensign, Natasha Kahn, and Ruth Simon. And I've just put some quotes. This is a very, very truncated version of the article. American consumers and their credit cards have helped the U.S. economy weather many rough moments. Now, as recession fears resurface, the worry is that they might be maxed out. Americans' inflation-adjusted debt burdens are starting to grow further beyond pre-pandemic levels. on a per household basis. As of the fourth quarter of 2024, the average household's credit card debt surpassed $10,000, adjusted for inflation, for the first time since 2009, according to data compiled by consumer finance website WalletHub. The University of Michigan's closely watched index of consumer sentiment nosedived 11% to 57.9 in mid-March from 64.7 last month. Sentiment among Democrats was the lowest ever recorded, including the depths of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Even Republicans are feeling worse, although many think that any short-term economic pain caused by Trump's moves will be worth it. On a recent Sunday, Trump declined to rule out a recession. Companies making everything from causal ware to luxury goods to liquor to everyday staples are sounding early warnings of a slowdown in consumer demand. Delta Airlines and American Airlines cut their first quarter guidance this past week. On Tuesday, Delta Chief Economic Officer Ed Bastian said that there was, quote, something going on with economic sentiment, something going on with consumer confidence, unquote. Well, that's the article in a nutshell there. And you can really tell that Americans are starting to be tapped out. They are running out of credit, like the line of credit they need to continue consuming apace. And that is bad sign for everyone's profit margins. And of course, when profit margins go down, layoffs are not far behind. And so if we do tumble into a recession here, then we can look forward to the death spiral of more layoffs, even less spending because now people are laid off, and now even less spending causes more layoffs, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to give credit cards to the American population as a Band-Aid to our lack of income when, I don't know, at least people have some chance of owning homes and can get jobs that pay reasonable amounts of money. But now everyone, you can get a nice, $45K job at Starbucks or something, and that's what's available to us here. So,
yeah. Well, look, man, the 2008 financial crisis, what was the thing that touched off the conflagration? It was the fact that the banks had run out of creditworthy customers and had started having to sell in order to continue to sell the same volume of mortgages, had to start selling these products to subprime customers, and they used shady tactics to do it. And then when those debts turned out to be unpayable, rather than canceling the debts or even printing them, which would have we could have monetized those debts and that still would have involved massive losses for all the bets in the secondary market for all of these crazy mortgage products. But instead, we just bailed out the banks and propped up the value rather than admitting those debts were unpayable. We had the Federal Reserve monetize those debts to put off our reckoning with the massive amount of debt that we have here. So it really so there's that piece, but I'll just say again, the broader picture here is what's going to the American economy runs on debt, and what's going to happen when people can't plausibly be loaned money anymore. We're going to have to start admitting that not only can we not loan more money out, but some of the debts already written are going to not be payable as the economy sinks into a recession. So I wonder, Brian, I have no good answer to this question. I can't imagine that the Donald is just making these tariff moves and accepting short-term pain. He must think he's going to be able to pull some kind of a rabbit out of his hat here, ultimately, right? He's not just going to immolate his reputation here with dunderheaded, tariff whipsawing. Or is he? Is that actually what you think is going to happen? Do you think the Donald has some broader economic plan here? Or do you think that he's trying to allow the festering recession that should have happened, that we did not properly deal with in 2008 to finally happen, so he can start? Is he wanting to make this happen soon enough so he can, plausibly blame it on the prior administration? I don't know. I don't have a good feeling. I thought that the Donald was basically going to have, I thought 2.0 was going to look a lot like 1.0 with tax cuts for the wealthy and precious little else to write home about. So I wonder what you think. Is there a cogent economic plan here? Or is the situation just out of the Donald's control ultimately? And no matter what he does, the fact of the matter is the U.S. consumer is tapped out and our economy needs to go through a massive correction. And we need to admit that a lot of the debts that are currently on the books are going to ultimately be unpayable.
Well, it seems like the plan is to try to like bring back, back American industrial power and American manufacturing, right?
Yeah.
And there's just going to be some pain involved in that transition, and so as to whether it's like feasible to actually try to make that happen is another question. But people are always like freaking out about whatever the Donald is trying to do, and usually the hype is something you want to sell on. And so, I mean, I think the plan is to try to change the American economic landscape, and probably in a way that's overall for the best. Now, in the short term, though, I mean, it does cause changes. So
the published plan seems to be to cut taxes, federal taxes, for everyone making 150K or less, right? So I think the idea here is that suffer through the tariffs, but get that situation smoothed out and, cut taxes for people making less than 150K. But I just don't believe that. I mean, maybe that would make the economy recover if people had hundreds of more dollars a month to spend. But I don't know. I guess I don't necessarily believe that. I mean, the tax cuts that Donald brought in his first term were like expired for regular folks, but sunsetted much later for rich folks. I'm not quite sure they're really looking to cut taxes. I don't think I take them at face value, in other words, but the stated goal does seem to be cut everyone's taxes, eventually, if you can replace that income with tariff money.
Well, I would say that the Donald's like first administration. Well, if you're grinding out like an insurance company, like yours truly here, I mean, it was like I guess a good time in my career working at an insurance company, and so if he's able to like do that again, that will be good. And so I guess he pretty much did it before, but of course then the whole COVID thing happened. And then there's just the underlying questions about how if our economy is like actually just a crazy shell game or not. And like, and the COVID is like another crazy Band-Aid. The whatever that act was like the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. Yeah. So I don't know. What would happen if Kamala or someone else was in there? Like, what would the government be doing? I mean, certainly the status quo would probably be stretched out. So, I don't know. But the moves he's making, in principle, seem like they should maybe help if our economy has any fundamentals left, right?
I don't know. I feel like our economy doesn't have any fundamentals left, and I just don't think tariffs. The whole situation we're laying out here, where Americans don't make enough money to buy the products that they're producing, or to keep the economy. To keep the economy growing at the clip that it needs to grow, they just if they're tapped out. Like, no amount of tariffs and no amount of tax cuts is going to solve that fundamental problem.
Well, we were talking about the glorious catharsis that we need to have before, and so they were talking for a hot minute there. Elon was anyway, and a few other places about like doing an audit to see like how much gold is actually at Fort Knox.
Yeah.
And then there was talk about like releasing these Epstein documents, and those have both like petered out.
Yeah.
And so, we need to get to the bottom of these things, right? To really understand what's going on. And so, I think that we should expect some turbulence if things are going to change. But I suppose it could just mean that things are like changing for the worse. I'm sure that Donald Trump like wants to be a success, in that I just don't really think he is actually like a Nazi.
I think that. Yeah, I don't think that that's. It's just too good. It's just like the foundational myth of modern America is rooted in the events of World War II, and so that's just the pedal to the metal. That's just the worst thing you can call someone, and that's where we've landed. Again, I think in a previous time, we would have been looking for the signs that the Donald was like a consort of the devil. Oh, he's making devil sign. And it depends on whatever your cultural milieu is. That's the label you put on the person. So for us, the worst thing ever is like Hitler, so that's what the Donald gets, is labeled as Hitler.
So what does like Elon Musk believe though? Like, I think he must have like a Randian view of like the world, and he must think it's like up to him to save the whole world. So he needs to like enact his vision, and he must feel like he's qualified to do that. And in some ways, I mean, Elon Musk does seem like a hyper competent guy, and there is like there's like just the 80-20 rule in general. Like, I mean, 20% of the people do like 80% of the work, and then I think like 80 or 20% of those people do 80% of the work of those people.
It's fractally true. Yeah, there's a fractal situation there with the 80-20 rule.
So, I don't know. It's a lot of questions there. But you know, I'm sure Elon doesn't want to destroy the economy either. But it's like a question of like it's a marginal question, because if Elon's not up there doing his thing, then who is? And so, yeah, I don't know, man. We'll have to see, I guess. I don't know. Are you pessimistic or optimistic?
Well, I'm pessimistic. I don't think I think that there's a bunch of layers to this delightful wedding cake, and I think that there's a sizable cadre of Silicon Valley tech bros who want to reshape the whole. They've correctly identified that the nation state is withering away. A friend of mine sent me a video on this. It was actually pretty good this past week that I quite enjoyed. I think I think that they imagine themselves as being feudal lords of a new digital space. That is to say, they're trying to create a new version of a new digital version of the nation state in which they're the leaders, which is like, well, look, what my reaction to that video was like, yeah, okay, well, the river of history flows in a certain direction. It's when the feudal economy collapses, or when Rome's slave economy collapses, right? We don't go backwards towards more top-down systems of control. We graduate to more democratic systems of control, right? You eventually, King John signs the Magna Carta in 1218. I think I have that date right. You get the Russian and American revolutions. You get the French and American revolutions, followed by the Russian Revolution. It's in every case, it's always the idea has been we're going to become slightly more democratic than we were before. Women's suffrage, civil rights. That just seems to be the direction of history. So, I don't think they're going to be able to impose. I think the situation is far beyond their control. But I think they are right that the nation state is the nation state. Of course, it's the idea of countries is only as old as 1649 and the signing of the Peace of Westphalia, and the whole point was to stop the Pope from sending his agents across international borders and affecting politics in places that wanted to be Protestant now going forward and not Catholic anymore. And so before that, polities were organized into city-states. Like Florence was a city-state, not a country. Not Italy wasn't even a country until like the 30s when it finally unified. I think that's right. And Germany obviously unified in the 19th century and was previously a bunch of duchies, like a patchwork quilt of duchies. So the point is, the nation state is tied to the current international order, which is overseen by banks and not by popes. Right? Within the first central bank was 1691, the Bank of England, less than 50 years after the Peace of Westphalia, anyway. The first central bank. So that really leads me back to this huge debt crisis we have on here, because I remember in like November of 2019, I was watching the stock market crash every day, just like I am now, wondering if this is the final collapse when we have to reassess all of our asset values and all of our debt. Because the stock, like if you look at the 5-year chart, well, I guess you'd have to go out to the 6-year chart now that we're in 25. But if you look at the long-term chart of the major stock indices, you'll see they all swooned just like now, then in November of 2019. And that was the repo crisis, which is connected to the Federal Reserve. We've talked about it several times in this pod, so I won't outline the way the plumbing of that works now. But what had to happen was that the central bank had to switch. The Federal Reserve had to switch from quantitative tightening and flip back to quantitative easing, where they're printing money and monetizing debt again. Instead of rolling back their balance sheet, they had to go back to writing it up. And then, of course, when COVID came around, that was the massive transfer of wealth to which you alluded moments ago, Brian.
The CARES Act, right?
The CARES Act, yeah. We ended up doing a whole lot more money printing and a whole lot more wealth distribution to keep the economy going, and that's where we are now. And that 2019 was during the Donald's first term, so I wonder if that has anything to do with what's happening now. I'm sure I'm just guessing and have no idea, but that's what's happening in the stock market these past 2 weeks has me thinking back to 2019, and I just feel like, have we been running a synthetic economy since 2008? Was 2008 really the date when the debts, the American consumers could no longer prop the economy up with debt anymore? And then instead of admitting that fact, we just started printing money at the Federal Reserve to paper over it, and now we still have to deal with that. That's my best guess at what's going on at this moment. And I don't think that either the tech bros out in Silicon Valley, who enjoy outsized influence in the new Donald administration, nor the administration itself have any power to stop what's coming in terms of the mathematical certainty of a collapse of fractional reserve banking and debt-based currencies. With it is our future. So, yeah.
Well, hopefully, like our debt-based system, if it does come to an end, it's for the best, right?
Yeah, we're going to get rid of we're going to get rid of the toll booth, the rent seekers, right? That's who we just have too many parasites in the economy. That's fundamentally that is what the original capitalists would have said about what's going on now. The Adam Smiths and the John Stuart Mills, the John Maynard Keynes, not John Maynard Keynes. I forgot my third classical economist there, David Ricardo. That's what they would have said. Too many free riders, too much rent-seeking rentiers, as the French called it, which is still the economic term to this day. So that's my vision. Like once we, like the people who actually install things and build things and, the sanitation work, all those people, right? The classic example in that book by Rupert Bregman called Humanity, the classic example is the Irish banking strike versus the sanitation strike in London. He compares the banking strike went on for weeks, months, stretched on to months. No one cared. People just kept writing checks, and then eventually the checks themselves started becoming a currency in circulation. Like the bankers don't actually do anything. But when the sanitation workers go on strike, the matters resolved in days because sanitation is an actual crucial function. It's not just rent seeking, which is what finance is, right? They charge you for your future money. Yeah.
So what's our conclusion here?
The conclusion is, my best guess is what's happening is that the situation is outside of the Donald's control. That's what I think. I think that. Well, I feel like I felt like each massive swoon in the stock market was like the end, but I really think that the swoon in the stock market, that's going to be the last thing. So I guess I kind of expect the stocks to recover from their current excitement, before we really head down the rabbit hole here. I think that a final stock market, in other words, the stock market is like a lagging indicator. So I guess I think a broad write-off there would be one of the last things we'd see. Maybe I would look towards the price of debt, like the yield on the 10-year Treasury note. That really might be something we look towards. Like if that starts going really, really high or really, really low, we'll know that the capitalism is now in its latest crisis, which we have to go through every 7, 8, 9 years, whatever it is on average here. So yeah, that's what I think.
All right, yeah. I guess. There's just a lot of entropy and a lot of crazy things like our like all this debt and whatnot, and having like a synthetic economy, and then of course there's like the per capita wealth in America and all our natural resources, and these things are at odds with each other, and so the Donald has to try to steward this ship through the storm, and it's just really unclear how it's all going to play out is my feeling. So
well, why don't we take a short break? I'll rest my vocal cords, have another snort of this delicious coffee, and then we'll be back and we'll play some clips from, and I do have 2 podcasts of the week. So we'll play some clips from those, and we'll talk more about how our perception is shaped by those in power related to this whole debt fiasco right after this. And we're back from the break. How's it going, Brian?
Pretty good.
All right, so we're on to the part of the show where I usually play a clip or two from the System Failure Podcast of the Week. But this week, for an added layer of intrigue, I have 2 podcasts and 1 clip from each. So the first clip I've got here is from Mr. Chase Hughes on the Joe Rogan Experience. Mr. Hughes is an American expert on the analysis of human behavioral science. He served 3 terms in the Navy and has spent 20 years as a human behavior analyst and interrogator. Now, Messrs. Hughes and Rogan spent the vast bulk of this pod talking about how the way that the rollout of the COVID regime matched a known playbook, which this man had a hand in developing apparently, for like a psyop, for how do you convince the public, of something. One of the big themes we're always on about here on System Failure, or at least I am, is this idea that whenever there's an economic exploitation on, you have to the people who are being exploited, you have to tell them something and convince them of something. So there's usually some kind of a con that goes on with an economic exploitation. So this I wanted to highlight Hughes's appearance here on the JRE because they really dig into how to convince people of things, how to make people predisposed to believe what you want to tell them, how to, in other words, do an end around their faculties of the critical thinking, so that they'll just believe what you're thinking without examining it first, right? So that's what they talk about.
So I mean, I do so COVID skepticism isn't like the naughty thing that it used to be. It seems like it's not clear like why it was so important to vaccinate kids for a disease that doesn't really affect them. I think a lot of people, that's kind of in the zeitgeist now. But I mean, people who feel differently about the COVID thing, I guess, I mean, I'm sympathetic because, people, millions of people did die from the COVID. So, but I just want to assure our listeners that we are not Nazis. But it's just crazy. Just the powers that be are always capitalizing on these things in negative ways. It's like just what happened with like 9/11. And and also I just want to mention that like the COVID, what you were talking in the first half about the Pope and the nation states there. Yeah. And so like it's just a great example of the crumbling power of nation states, because what you saw is like Bill Gates and the World Economic Forum, they infiltrated like basically every single country, and they all had to respond in the same way, right? Yeah,
the international response to COVID was concerted. It was directed at some international level, right? Because these various governments all worked in concert with each other, and that suggests that there's a level of coordination and organization above the nominal heads of state that we think of as our leaders. And that's the same way. The anecdote of Charlemagne kneeling to say his Christmas prayers in St. Peter's Basilica on Christmas of the year 800, and having the Pope sneak up behind him and place the crown of the Holy Roman Empire upon Charlemagne's head. Right? The Pope was trying to bolster him. He was trying to set himself up as the guy who crowns the kings of Christendom. Right? That was his goal. And so from that time, 800 up until 1648. The popes really were the people that crowned the head. For the most part, were power fluctuates, but broadly speaking, the Pope would be the one who controlled the international geopolitics of Christendom. And it was only after the brutal 30 Years' War and the Treaty of Westphalen in 1649, they finally said, the Pope, you have to be locked behind your own borders. This is when the idea of the nation state was implemented. This idea that every square foot of the world, save for Antarctica, is carved up between nations, and all of us belong to one of these nations, and then there's borders and territory. Right before that, polities were organized more along the lines of city-states. Like Florence was a city-state. I think it's the 1930s when Italy finally unified itself into the country Italy we think of today. And in the 19th century, before the 19th century, Germany was this patchwork quilt of different duchies, and this is what the emperor of the Holy Roman Emperor was emperor of. So it's very interesting to note. And further, it's fascinating that the fall of the feudal political regime, that is to say, the thing where the Pope controls the kings and the nobility controls the people, that whole thing collapsed in 1649. and within 50 years you have your first central bank, right? So really the international politics is organized with central banks playing the role of the power over and above the aforementioned nominal heads of state once occupied by the popes. And so where I'm driving at this is that when the medieval economy collapsed, a good part of it was due to the Black Death in the 1349. The Black Death, like medicine there's a lot of overlap between medicine and faith just because the human body is so complex. No one really has a comprehensive understanding of how it works, and so medicine and faith overlaps. Well, we have witch doctors and in older societies, and so the coming of the plague in 1349 like badly discredited the church, who was supposed to have an inside track with God, but they were working with a wrath of God theory of disease and instead of a germ theory of disease, and so it became really clear the church had no idea what was causing the plague. And to make matters worse, the clergy died at greater rates than regular people because they were always giving out last rites, so they were disproportionately exposed to diseased bodies in ways that regular folks weren't. So it is very interesting to note that while the Black Death had a high death rate and COVID had a relatively low death rate in terms of mortality, they both played a crucial role in the crumbling of a prior economic system and system of control that goes along with that. So in this little section of so that's a great observation. So this little section of the system failure, during the podcast section here, the theme will be like, how do you how do you control people's perceptions when you have these, especially when systems seize up and stop working so well? Like, how do you convince the economically exploited to consent to continue in their exploitation, even as the system works less and less well with each passing day? So with that, Brian, can we fire up clip number 1?
It's effective. It's very effective. They've been doing this for a long time, and they've got a playbook written by Edward Bernays, of all people, wrote this book. And the book's called Crystallizing Public Opinion. And you can see it in every one of these operations. And it's a short book. You can read it in like 2 hours. Every one of these things follows that playbook of PSYOPs.
Which makes sense why he would change the name of the Department of War to the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
Like, it's way more palatable.
Yeah. And he's also the reason that bacon became part of American breakfast.
Well, kudos to him for that.
Yeah.
That was a good move.
Yeah.
Bacon's pretty solid.
Funny, he was Sigmund Freud's nephew.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What if they did coke together?
The father of propaganda is Sigmund Freud's relative nephew.
That's crazy.
Sigmund Freud helped raise this guy.
So did you read his book?
Oh, yeah.
What does it say in there?
So essentially it's capturing mass public attention and making the desired outcome about identity, belonging, and being part of a tribe. So to give you an example, Virginia Slims hired him to say, like, hey, it's just men that are smoking our cigarettes. And he's like, yeah, well, women need to smoke. You want women to smoke? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So he launches this thing called Torches of Freedom. Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, you were telling me about it.
Oh, my God. Bring a photo of this if you can, because I'm getting excited about this. These people were compromised in such a crazy way. So he says women are told not to smoke. So he goes against all of this stuff at the beginning. Women are told not to smoke. Everybody tells you can't smoke in public. This is about women's rights. It has nothing to do with cigarettes. So he organized this massive women's rights movement.
An ancient prejudice has been removed.
Isn't it just...
Look at the fucking chain. American intelligence. Look at that. The chain says American intelligence around the wrist. Lucky Strike cigarettes.
Well, there you have it. Yep. They call him the godfather of public relations, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
Well, in the last podcast, we were talking about how women's liberation is this thing that's desirable, but is used to reduce everyone's income, basically, and now it's impossible to afford a house. And so here they're using women's liberation to get women to smoke, which is awesome.
Yeah, they make it about identity, right? This is part of the playbook that was used during the COVID regime, and the part of any great marketing campaign, right? The whole idea of calling them freedom torches and tying cigarette use to the women's vote, like the women's right to vote, right? Women's suffrage movement of the early part of the 20th century. Absolutely. I mean, that's just brilliant marketing, right?
Well, yeah, I like this idea. Like, oh, you need this freedom torch. Like, people, it's really not that hard, it seems.
Yeah, it's women don't traditionally smoke. An ancient prejudice, has been revealed as women's rights to smoke cigarettes. It's just, and there's like a grain of truth to it, which is like the part that makes it so insidious. It's just like, oh man. And so you said it there. There's such thing as prevailing conditions in the labor market, right? And appreciate that World War II is this turning point. And before World War II, governments worked their will through armies, but after World War II, the new paradigm was a Cold War paradigm in which it's more of a war of propaganda and less a war of boots on the ground and soldiers. So here we've got this situation where the labor market is comprised mainly of men. And the idea here is like obviously in order to have a workforce of men, you have to have women traditionally filled the role of being the support. They would raise the kid. This is economically crucial act of raising the kids and keeping the household, right? That is a rigid social structure, which you can see why there'd be a complaint about the rigidity of that social structure. And then there's a problem where women share the national income. The employers were forced to pay each worker enough to afford a family. They had to, or they wouldn't get any workers because family formation would be impossible. And part of the way that they destroyed prevailing conditions in the labor market, or manipulated prevailing conditions in the labor market to make it more profitable, in addition to moving vast amounts of American business overseas in the 70s, was this women's lib idea. Same exact playbook. It's about women, like the idea that you should also go to work and submit to exploitation by the man, was a message that really resonated with women the way that they packaged it. But there was just intentionally, there was just no thought given to the economic fallout that would result, and there was no talk about how moving huge tracts of the domestic workforce offshore at the same time that you double the size of the workforce by bringing women to work in a short amount of time destroys the economics of the labor market and tilts the balance of power in a way that massively benefits employers, right? And since that happened, the gradual uptick in wages as they rose in tandem throughout the entirety of U.S. history they rose in tandem with worker productivity. Worker productivity kept continuing apace from the 70s. Like when I think about my job as an accountant, running my spreadsheet would take a crew of like 30 people to do manually. And you think about the spreadsheet as a prosthesis. That means that many fewer accountants are needed than were required prior to the advent of the computer in the 70s. So all of this creates a situation, right? This is the Marxist prophecy coming true. Technology is destroying the ability. Right? Technology is how you offshore. It's like fax machines and international jet travel. That's what allows us to offshore our workforce. And then there's this propaganda campaign that exactly matches Edward Bernays' Freedom Torch campaign that pulls it all off. So I just found that to be really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, when you look at like the COVID and the war in the Ukraine and the 9/11, I guess just all through my life I've been reminded how susceptible we are to propaganda.
Yeah. And I really just wanted to circle back to something you said at the top of the second half, Brian. Like, my heart does, like, people that said, all right, I have no idea what's in these shots, so I'm just going to accept the most prominent authority and substitute that for my own judgment. Right? That is a perfectly rational thing to go. You can see how people would get the answers they get by applying that formula. That's a perfectly reasonable formula to apply to the situation. I think that skepticism towards authority is a better one. But then you're kind of you're kind of left figuring things out for yourself, which you have to trust in your own recognizance if you're going to reject the opinions of authority. So there's a lot to be said to embracing the pirate code, and there's a lot to be said for accepting authority. It just depends on who you think has the higher margin of error. Excuse me. Well, to bring this to land this plane back on the aircraft carrier of like politics in 2025. Can we move on, Brian, to the second clip? This one is going to be our dear friends, Mr. Dave Smith and Mr. Robbie the Fire Bernstein on their hyper-libertarian podcast, Part of the Problem. And here they're talking about what Democrats can do to be relevant is the theme of their show. And so I thought maybe this clip would be entertaining.
it does seem to me that this is different in scale and kind than any other situation like that. I've never really lived through something quite like with one of the major two parties being as devastated as the Democrats are right now. As I've said before on the show, it's to lose your voter base and your propaganda apparatus all in one election is quite a loss. And they've also just lost a kind of cultural factor that's hard to put into words. But I guess to say it in the simplest terms, it's like they made the Republicans the cool kids and the Democrats kind of like the nagging Karens, which is really like, it is for someone my age. I'm going to be 42 next month. For someone my age who was born in 1983, it's hard to overstate how impossible that would have seemed. Like the idea that the Republicans could ever be the cool ones amongst 17-year-olds or something like that just seems like that would have been like unthinkable. As unthinkable as like if you were like, okay, like if you had a bet with someone in like the 11th grade or something and you were like, I got to turn someone into the coolest kid in school. And I was like, all right, you got to turn the principal into the coolest kid in school. And you'd be like, okay, well, that's impossible. That cannot be done. That was making the Republicans the cool guys is like on that level. So anyway, all of this is going on. And while this is happening, it's interesting to see everybody kind of give their own thoughts on what exactly it is that the Democrats could do. Some say you got to like go harder against Trump. Some people say you got to abandon the woke stuff. Some people say you got to get the working class vote again. And it's interesting, even though nobody seems to have an actual plan to put into action. And so anyway, this is kind of just one of the things that I've been thinking about. And while everyone is talking about this, you see like these different wings of the Democratic Party and like what their vision for how you're supposed to do this is. This, I guess, is leading to some of the stuff that we're talking about now. In this kind of vacuum, it does seem like there's different Democrats who are kind of like starting to make some noise. I still have not seen anything yet that I think has a chance of being successful. I don't know what you do, Rob, if you think there's one wing or another or one strategy or another that could rise back to be successful, but I'm not seeing it.
I think it's unbelievable how poorly the Democrats are operating right now. The best messengers they have are Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. They're not doing a particularly good job. Then they had that incredibly cringe video with Cory Booker that they were all reading the exact same script, and they're like trying to be edgy. But for all their thing of the dignity of the office, now like they're trying to figure out how to use curse words, but they don't know how to, like you said, they just don't know how to be cool. It doesn't fit their personalities. Also, the Democratic senators blocked the bill to keep women out of men out of female sports. I think the trans issue is such a loser for them. And their old guard, they're still trying to pitch Ukraine war to the end. And then when they're putting out social media videos, you got that lady who looks like a witch. She put out a weird video last week. They seem to be just at a total loss for how to, and by the way, the branding for them is easy. We're supposed to be the party of the people, and we're supposed to make sure that you guys have good jobs and great benefits, so we're going to go back to what we're doing. Except that they seem to be so in bed with the deep state and to be on that side that they can't not pitch wars. And I think as Elon Musk, we've said it before, has returned freedom to the internet, I don't think that they have the propaganda tools to just try and shame us into if you're not listening to us, you're not nice, and you want to kill grandma.
You're exactly right, dude. And I think really the key is that you have to recognize that it's not the way the issue is put out is like, well, what can the Democrats do to get the voters back on their side? Or what can they do to get the working class back on their side or minorities back on their side or something like that? But you realize if that was just the case, then the Democrats would have been operating in a different manner for many years now. Like if the idea was getting enthusiasm and fundraising and votes and getting back, well, then they would have been embracing Bernie Sanders back in 2016. If the goal was to stay relevant and dynamic and win voters in this ever-changing culture, well, they had figures like Bobby Kennedy Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard or people like this. They ran all of them out. With the exception of Bernie Sanders. They attempted to run Bernie Sanders out. They just didn't realize that Bernie Sanders is such a pathetic, loyal dog that he was like, I'll just wait. That's cool. I'll just wait here in the yard and wait till you give me some scraps. I don't care. But the real key there is like at what you said about the deep state. The goal isn't how do we get everybody back? How do we become popular again?
All right. Well, that's the clip right there. Yeah, that's it. What could the Democrats be doing, right? Because we set up we talked about Reagan already here, Brian. And so, of course, we talked about offshoring and all of our factories moving overseas. And, of course, that destroyed the political power and Democratic economic base that was the labor unions. And so the Clintons pioneered a new Democratic strategy of having the same corporate donors that have traditionally run the Democratic Party, leading to the deregulation of Glass-Steagall in '99, ultimately setting us up for the dot-com collapse in 2008. And Dave Smith said it best there. I remember in 2020, Florida went heavily for the Donald and also voted for the $20 minimum wage on the same ticket. Both of those won major support, especially in Republican hotbeds like Miami-Dade County. It's really or the polls that showed Bernie Sanders, defeating the Donald handily in 2016 when comparing him to the Donald in the primaries during that time, right? In other words, what the Democrats should be advocating for here is the sort of New Deal Bernie Sanders policies that deal with the problem that the working and lower class, the working and middle class don't have enough money to buy the products we need to keep our economy afloat, dealing with that problem by redistributing wealth from where it is pooling up uselessly in the bank accounts of the already wealthy, right? That is the obvious, it is the New Deal policies, the ones that won FDR 4 consecutive national elections, right? Those are the policies that the Dems should be pursuing, right? We should have a balance between the party of tax cuts for the wealthy and deregulation and a party of re-regulation and tax increases for the wealthy and redistribution to lengthen the. You remember that Wallace and Gromit train chase from The Wrong Trousers, Brian, where Wallace and Gromit are chasing the penguin on a toy train track, and they're frantically throwing down track in front of the train as it's going, right? That's what the New Deal Bernie Sanders policies are. They deal with the fundamental contradiction within the capitalist system of production by taking wealth where it's pooling up uselessly and inoculating it to where it's sorely needed, and that way, and trying to, we obviously are going to need a new way to organize production at some point in history, right? It would be crazy to believe that our current scheme for organizing the production and distribution of goods is the one and only way to do things till the end of time, right? I mean, and so we just need more track to get to that point rather than just embracing calamity. But as it happens, the Democrats have completely abdicated their part in that discourse, and so we're just Thelma and Louising it off of a cliff here, with just no contact with a critical view of our system, a critical view of the system that we're driving over the cliff here.
Well, I think obviously you'd want the Democrats to embrace. It's crazy they haven't embraced Bernie Sanders more. But what they like to do is trot him out there to kind of regain support so they can go back to doing what it is that they always do. But I think if you're the establishment Democrats, your plan here is to hope that you can just kind of weather the Donald Trump storm here, because it happens every time where people can't stand the current establishment, so they vote for the other party, and everyone's all excited at first, and then they also don't fix the problem, and then there becomes excitement for back to the other party, and rinse and repeat. So
the Democrats have been able to keep that cycle going. Without actually offering the sorts of policies that traditionally favored the working and middle classes, or at least since the New Deal favored that's what I'm hoping we can break by 2028. this thing where the Democrats, rather than actually offering substantive policies, can use an appeal to identity in just the way that the Freedom Torches appealed to identity, and in just the way that Women's Lib appealed to identity. Right, the goal here is to get one over once again on the working and middle classes by offering this obsession with identity in lieu of actual redistributive policies that would keep the capitalist system running long enough for us to figure out an alternative. But no one wants to talk about the fact that we need an alternative. The works of Karl Marx are banned and are as good as reading the Devil's Black Bible or something. People look at you askance if you mention you've been cracking the Communist Manifesto or any other of Marx's works. So that's where we sit.
Well, there's all this energy behind, like, I don't know, the deep state or the military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
And so they need to they're going to obviously continue to try to find a way to keep on doing what they're doing. And so, I mean, COVID to me seems like a way to, like, sort of raise the stakes into a new, like, just the idea that people in the Middle East are, like, threaten our freedoms or whatever, kind of like wore off as we went into the 2000s.
They hate our freedoms. That's why they're attacking us. They've got no legitimate grievances. It is just that they see us with freedom and can't stand the thought of it.
Yeah. So now, right. So now we've got this new frontier of, medical stuff where you just have to, like, trust the medical establishment, even though we have, like, our American healthcare is a complete disaster. So I'm sure that our reptilian overlords will find some other way to raise the stakes, or that's going to be their game plan to try to get support behind, the establishment.
Yeah,
right?
They must be looking to trot something out. But I think that the weak spot in their armor is going to be the Democratic Party and the obvious lack of efficacy of continuing to beat the identity drum while offering nothing in the way of substantive policies. We've got to make sure that's a loser, right? That's the only way we can get out of the trap. Like what you said, the left-right boot kick of voting for one party, they do nothing. Then you vote for the next party, they do nothing. So then you rush back to the other party, right? The weak spot, as I'm saying here, that is going to be not allowing the discourse to get hijacked back to these identity traps, and instead, that's the word that Mr. Hughes uses, the identity trap, as a persuasion technique at the top of his pod.
Right.
That's the word he uses, identity trap. So we got to not fall for the identity trap, and instead make sure that the Dems cannot get away with cheating as they did in 2016 and 2020, and shoving another neoliberal candidate who has nothing to offer but more tax cuts for the wealthy and more deregulation, when what we need is the exact opposite of that, just to keep our ship afloat for another couple of decades while we can figure something out here. That's the way I see it.
Well, I mean, I think the real chink in their armor is just the free discourse that's available.
Yeah.
And it's why it's important to listen to the System Failure podcast, where we're not afraid to talk about Karl Marx and, tell all your friends and get them to listen to.
Yes. I love it. One final point. To take part in this discourse, I've been thinking about going back on Reddit. I don't know. What do you think, Brian? Should I... my concern about Reddit is the never-ending scroll feed that blows out my attention span. I don't want that to happen. But maybe if I time-boxed it or use some other, some other strategy, I could potentially do it. But I feel like I want to be... When I use Reddit habitually, I just kind of infinitely doom scrolling. But what I really want to do is fight back against the horde of bots that seek to prevent the sort of... that seek to prevent a pivot to Bernie Sanders, a long overdue pivot to Bernie Sanders, like New Deal sorts of policies, and not. In other words, I want to do my small part to fight for the soul of the Democratic Party here. So I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about going back into the free. I do miss it. I have my news stool has three legs. One is podcasts where I listen to like Joe Rogan and Dave Smith sorts that we just heard, and then I have my Wall Street Journal, which is very much within the paradigm of the neoliberal order,
the orthodoxy.
The orthodoxy, yeah. But that's a good base to have. And then I have the super, the Reddit, which is just like the mainstream Democratic discourse. And with those three angles of sight, you can kind of form what I think to be a decent model of what's going on.
Well, I think you can kind of go on Reddit to see what people are saying. It's hard to imagine like changing the tide of discourse on Reddit, but I don't know, maybe people want to go on the System Failure subreddit and where we can maybe have some kind of discourse or something.
Yeah, I post the weekly essays there, and but I got to think of more content to post up to the. Maybe I should, obviously, the Wall Street Journal article of the week would be a great example. I should start posting that on our subreddit. So, all right.
Well, I guess I think the online discourse, at least like the comments that I see on YouTube, seems like surprisingly reasonable. I mean, usually they're going to be in favor of. Like, I was watching some hit piece on Joe Rogan earlier this week where they play like some dark music and then be like, Joe Rogan stole his ideas for podcasting from Tom Green, and I don't.
Isn't that true though? Doesn't Rogan say that he did? Or I mean.
Yeah, I mean, they showed the moment where he was on Tom Green and that he kind of like was won over by the idea of just doing his own kind of broadcast, and I mean, the idea that. It's like they're trying to accuse him of, I don't know, just being like a joke stealer. They're trying to say he steals like Bill Burr's jokes or whatever.
All right.
Well, they just kept on playing like clip after clip of Joe Rogan, and they put like kind of like a dark color scheme on it in some some tense sounding music. And then in the comments we're all like, piling in about how Joe Rogan's a terrible person. But anyway, like if you look at the comments on like a Joe Rogan video, they're usually pretty reasonable. Whereas if you go to Reddit, though, like all the comments are just terrible and make you want to kill yourself.
Yeah. Well, I like to sort by controversial on big threads, or at least that was my game back in the day. And there you can kind of see the battle line, moving to and fro. So
the front,
the front. I don't know. Not sure if I love this idea. My mind has been a lot better placed since not going on Reddit. So just thinking about how I can most readily contribute, put the shoulder to the wheel, whatnot, because I do think that, well, those capitalists, they are the grave diggers, as Marx said. They're their own grave diggers in the sense that they will fire us all to save $1 this quarter, not realizing that we won't be able to buy back their products after that, and their whole system will be up for grabs. So. With that in mind, we need some real. We need to at least have some. We need to at least bring back the New Deal. Bring back some Bernie Sanders policies, something like that. So the endless obsession with identity.
Yeah. Well, we need to demand accountability from our government.
Yeah,
which is just what we're doing here.
Yeah. Yes. All right, Brian. Well, this is usually the moment when I encourage our intrepid system failure listeners to head on over to systemfailure.org. There, you can read the weekly essay written by yours truly. And you can also get in touch with either Brian or myself over at systemfailure.org. And if you feel like it, you can even enter in your email address to get on our our newsletter list. We hope to see you all online. Have a great week.
All right, see you folks.